Today I want to talk to you about dyslexia and how foundational approaches to learning how to spell and how to read are not serving all of the brains in the classroom. So today we're going to do things a little bit differently. We're focusing on how we can support our children in developing the skill needing to process words. I'm going to share what the research actually says about spelling and the dyslexic brain, and walk you through the methods that are genuinely backed by science, not just popular advice, because there's a difference and your child needs the right tools. No more Band-Aid approaches. And I want to say this up front. Your child doesn't need to have an official diagnosis of dyslexia. If your child struggles to hold spellings, has ADHD, or just seems to forget the words that they've definitely learned before, this episode is for you. If this kind of content sounds like it would be suitable for your child and for your family, then don't forget to hit the subscribe and the follow for wherever you're watching or listening. Every other week, I share all of the research that I've been amalgamating that supports families just like yours at the intersection of teen well-being and academics. Today, we're going for the actionable approach. Grab your coffee or your cup of tea and let's dive in. What's actually happening in the dyslexic brain? This is a very important part for us to cover. Most of us learn how to spell through what researchers call the phonological pathway. This is where we learn the different sounds that are made and string it together. It's the ka, a, t process. So what's happening for your dyslexic child? Well, a neurologist called Sally Shaywitz. She's been imaging dyslexic brains for well over 30 years at the Yale University Centre for Dyslexia and Creativity. She states that through the imaging, we identify that the dyslexic brain is processing with that phonological pathway. However, it's not working to the best of its ability. So in Shay's words, it's not a reading problem that we have. It's more so that the process that we would normally build upon, it's working inefficiently. The parts of the brain that are holding the sound to symbol mapping process are firing. They're working. However, they're working inefficiently. And therefore, that means that our spellings are not becoming as automatic. So what does this look like day to day? Well, you already know it. At the kitchen table, your child is sitting there doing the read, cover, write process that schools crack on as being top notch, and they're still not learning things. They're trying to sound out the word, map out the symbols, understand the meaning, and retain all of that information while holding on to a mental whiteboard that is shrinking because of the anxiety that they have knowing that they're doing something that they're not naturally good at. So that blank stare, the battle for spellings, the frustration when you see the word because and know they should know how to spell it, but again, it's written wrong. That frustration that everyone in the family has slowly bubbling up, it's there because the system is not supporting your child's unique learning needs. But today, in this podcast, I'm sharing with you the evidence that's going to make sure that you now have the tools that will support their unique brain in order to give them the resources they need and to support them within and beyond the classroom. Now here's the second part, and this one also comes from a neuroscientist. This is Maryanne Wolf. She wrote the book Proust and the Squid, one of the most extraordinary books about the process of reading. Wolf's research shows that our brain, when we are born, doesn't already know how to read and process words. What we do is we build that brain. We build our ability to learn to spell and to read. And crucially, there's more than one way to build said part of the brain. As we've mentioned, the typical route that we would take is the phonological way. But there are so many different pathways. There's movement, there's visual memory, there's meaning, there's story. There are at least 4 different pathways that we can explore that are going to support a child who doesn't like the phonological pathway as the only way to build that reading brain. Now, what I'm sharing might come a little bit as a shock, especially as a classroom teacher. I was definitely guilty of hammering home the importance of spelling, doing it every week. It didn't matter if I was teaching year 6 or year 9. I was so big on spellings. And one of the ways that we would encourage it is this read, cover, write process, because it's what I was taught and it's what became the most mainstream approach to doing it. What I realized was most of my students who had neurodiversity or were dyslexic, it didn't matter how much I hammer home to them that they needed to practice their spelling. It wasn't showing progress in the way that we would expect. So I did a lot of research and I went through a program called Nessie, which I'm going to link down below because it's an incredible teaching guide that shows us how we can break down spellings in a different way. But essentially what I learned is that we need to build that spelling brain in a multifaceted way. It can't just be that phonological pattern that we used to do. And I'm not just going to do movement or meaning or visual memory. Instead, I'm going to blend them together. And this means that spelling and understanding is not going to be built on a fragile platform. I don't want your child to memorize their spellings for that week, do really well on the spellings test, but a couple weeks from now, no longer remember how to spell it. We want this to be foundational knowledge that they are encoding because they understand the entire process. And that is what multisensory learning does. And it's why it works when simply repeating something doesn't. So if you're still with me, great, because we are about to get practical. But before I do that, I want to dig into a couple of the things that we're doing that aren't working. Not as a name it and shame it vibe, we don't do that here, but instead because when we understand where our hiccups are, we can remove them, adapt them, and find the right solution and tool for your child. And that is so exciting because that is where we see progress. Why the usual methods don't work. Let me start by naming the most common things that our families do to support their child with a dyslexic brain in order to learn how to read and how to spell. I'm naming these because if you're doing them as well and you're not seeing progress, it's okay. Now we're going to understand the why behind it. I don't think this is a hot take or anything because I've already said it, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who has this love-hate relationship with it. But the first is the look, cover, write process. This is something that is used in almost every UK primary school classroom. And for most learners, it works fine. But for a dyslexic brain, it relies almost entirely on visual memory. They look at the word, they cover it, and now, because they don't have that phonological pathway process in their brain, they're now trying to remember how to spell it based on what it looked like, the shape of that word. And therefore, if your child's visual memory is weak, which it often can be with a dyslexic or neurodivergent brain, then this whole process is whack. It doesn't work because it's relying on their least effective tool. And getting them to do it more and more and more consistently isn't going to change anything. In fact, it is often what causes the shame spiral that pushes them away, creates that fixed mindset, and doesn't allow them to process and grow through the learning experience. When I say spellings, what do you think as a parent? For many of our parents, it's the thing that just does their head in, especially because spellings are often sent home on a Thursday or Friday evening. And the thing is, the list of words is not what everyone has an issue with. It's the timing. If we get spellings on Thursday or Friday, they likely stay at the bottom of that bag until maybe Sunday night, Monday morning, and then they go to school and the exam or the spellings test is either on a Monday or a Tuesday. That's not learning. That is scrambling around, everyone feeling stress, creating a negative connotation towards spellings, and hoping for the best, knowing you're not going to do very well. And Daniel Willingham, we talked about him in a couple of our videos. He's the author of Why Kids Don't Like School. He points out that this whole cramming experience actually creates the feeling of learning with absolutely no retention. So if your child's lucky, they might pass that spellings test and then they feel like, oh yes, good, I know it because I have those green ticks. But ask them again a couple weeks later. Do they still know those spellings? This just mirrors what we've talked about with Ebbinghouse's forgetting curve. Remember, 24 hours later, we forget up to 70% of what we learned because it's no longer encoded. We didn't put it into the long-term memory. So giving spellings on a Thursday or Friday, asking children to write that test on a Monday or Tuesday, that's not learning. It doesn't build retention. They will no longer know those words when you see it in their notebook. Well, if anyone just saw that, I just spilled coffee all down my trousers. That sucks. Okay, the third mistake that I've made as a teacher in supporting dyslexic learners is relying on phonics. Now, phonics is great. Don't come at me. It's incredible for most words and most learners. But for the irregular words, yacht, Wednesday, necessary, these words don't work with phonics and therefore are not going to be strong enough to hold that child's understanding of spellings and spelling rules. Those three mistakes, we don't want to keep doing them, right? Doing the same thing over and over and over again, that's insanity. So now that we know why they don't work for our dyslexic children, let's shift into what will work. This is the practical core of today's episode, and it's taken from research that we've had since the 1930s, but it is the best research that we have in supporting dyslexic learners. It comes from Orton-Gillingham, and the best part is you don't need to be a trained specialist in order to use it at home. So now's the perfect time for you to grab your notebook, and we're going to write down the method. The first step in this process in supporting your child who is dyslexic to learn to read and to spell. First, we say it. We say the word together, we say it slowly, and we break it down into sounds. Wednesday. Even though we don't say it like that, that is how we are going to say it out loud. It's like when you were a child and you learned to spell knife with a K by saying knife every time you went to go write it. Same process. Step number 2, see it. Write it down and find a hook. This is my favorite part of spelling. We write the word really large and clear and we say, right, what do you see? Is there a smaller word hiding in here? Do the letters look like the word? Is there a way that we could use how the letters are formed to create an image in our mind? Like the word bed. For a lot of our students who are dyslexic who switch their B's and their D's, knowing how the word bed looks like a bed supports them in that spelling process. This is the same thing, and you'll be so surprised to see how many little clues and little stories you can come up with to help your child remember spellings. And one of my favorites is necessary, because necessary has one collar, but just like us, it's necessary that we have 2 socks. So 1 C, 2 S's. Make it weird, make it memorable, make it visible. Visible. The weirder the hook, the more memorable it will be. And here's a way you can go one step further. What I've noticed with the students that we work with, they love visual coding. And so once you found that tricky part in the word, write that specific part in a different color, whether it's the 2 S's and 1 C for necessary, or it's the Wednesday part, the NES in Wednesday. Make sure you change the color in that word so that they can start acknowledging that there's a break between putting their pencil on the paper, taking it off, putting their proper pencil back on the paper. That stop-start connects something in their brain. Step number 3, say it with the trick. Big elephants can always use small exits because Wednesday, knife, necessary, 1 collar, 2 sock. The more that we say these words with their weird and wonderful hook out loud, the more they become encoded. It's sticky. It's difficult because we had to come up with that unique process of remembering that word. So just like our guys from Make It Stick who talk about making learning difficult for our brain and how that tells our memory to hold on to it, that is a big thing that we're doing here. Okay, step number 4 actually has its own proper name. It's called simultaneous oral spelling, and it's because it's used by specialist dyslexia tutors, and it's more powerful than silent writing. It's really simple. Your child says the word out loud and then says each letter as they spell it. Wednesday, Wednesday. And then we read the word back. Wednesday, Wednesday. Through this process, through the simultaneous oral spelling process, there are 3 pathways firing. Remember at the beginning I told you there is more than just the phonological way? In this say out loud process, we have the voice, the hand, and the eye all tracking those spellings. Step number 5 is how we make sure that it goes from learning it today to making it stick long term, and that is spaced repetition. We learn it today, then we revisit it either tonight or tomorrow morning. Then, depending on how difficult we found the process, we will either revisit it the next day or a couple days later. But we're leaning into spaced repetition to ensure that that information gets encoded into long-term memory. If you'd like to learn more about memory and how things stick, then head over to episode 6 and episode 22. We deep dive into the research there. Quick breath. Okay, if you've just mentally remembered 3 words that you've been doing spellings with your child and they just can't get it, good. Hold on to that, because coming up next, I'm going to be sharing with you what schools never get to, but what learners desperately need. The Morphology Unlock. I want to talk about something that doesn't get nearly enough airtime when we talk about dyslexia and learning how to spell. And the thing is, I think it is our most powerful tool in supporting learners, especially older learners. It's called morphology. So a morpheme is the smallest unit in a word that has meaning. The building blocks, a root, a prefix, a suffix. Now, here's why it's so important that I want you to stay with me in supporting your dyslexic learner. I've shared with you multisensory learning, but I've also noted the caveat. It works brilliantly for individual words. But what if, instead of memorizing and learning individual words, your child can learn a group of words because they've noticed a pattern in meaning? This could potentially unlock 20 words at once. That is what morphology does, and that's why I think it's so exciting that we spend the time to dig into these morphemes and teach our child not just phonologically, not just multisensory, but also morphologically as well. So morphology doesn't follow a phonological pattern. Instead, it uses meaning to help with the spellings. And this is actually a very different cognitive pathway. one that many of our dyslexic students find more reliable and efficient. So before you make up your mind, let me give you a concrete example. So if your child is preparing for their spelling test and they need to learn the word photosynthesis, so we're going to say it out loud, we're going to spell it out loud, we're going to write it in big and look for those key little words. While we're writing it out and looking for hidden words, you may have noticed the root word photo. Now photo means light. Now because of that, your child can now make an educated, confident guess at spelling words like photograph, photon, telephoto, and photosynthesis. And it links to all of the definitions of that word. Photosynthesis is the use of light to create the nutrients that plants need. A photograph is how we use light to capture an image in real time. All of these things use light, which makes sense as to why we have the same spelling of photo used in all of them. They're no longer going to guess based off of what it looks like. Instead, they're going to understand photo means light. And so I know that first chunk of this word is PHOTO. For a GCSE student, this is transformative because one session on understanding bio, B-I-O, means life, we've unlocked biology, biome, biography, biodiversity, antibiotic, microbiome, all of these words that are typically spelled potentially with an E, not sure if there's a Y. We take away all of the guesswork, because they will know that BIO means life, and therefore they'll start to understand that all of these other words have to do with life, and therefore they will all include BIO. And the beauty is that the experience when we understand the meaning of words and then adapt it to our spellings gives about a confidence, a transformative confidence that is far beyond anything that could be memorized. Because now there's no second guessing. There's no humming and hawing about, ooh, does that look right? Because they're trying to just go off of what it looks like. Instead, they've pulled meaning, they understand the roots, and they can relay that information over and over and over again. And when spellings have always felt arbitrary and like a coded message that they just couldn't crack, giving concrete answers to a child is going to create so much space in their brain, so much lightness, because now they understand. They get to be part of the team that it's in the know, that understands how to decode these words. So if I've absolutely convinced you that this is the way forward, point for me, that's very good, but really it's a win for you and your family above all. How can we use this at home? Start with the suffixes. We've got a prefix, pre, beginning, and a suffix at the end. Your words like tion, shun, versus sion, shun, or cion, shun. All of these different suffixes are going to be so important in exams. And this family, this group of shun, has so many words. Nation, station, education, examination, congratulation, extension, suspicion. One session on the difference between tion, sion, cion is going to be worth so much more than 20 read, cover, write experiences. Then head to the OUGH group. One session here is going to be powerful because we've got so many words. Tough, cough, already different sounds. Though, through, burrow, bought, thought. Going through these together is going to show your child that even when the words are irregular, there are patterns there too. We just need to look for them. Now on the flip side, if your child is in primary, so they're preparing for their SATs or perhaps the entrance exams, start with the prefixes first. Un means not happy, uncertain, unfinished. Head over to re, which means again, retake, retouch, recycle, rewrite, redo, review. These are small building blocks, but they are huge unlocks. I want to be honest about something too. The research on dyslexia and morphology are clear. Teaching word structure is one of the most evidence-backed ways that we can teach spellings, but it works best if it's systematic, which means working through words in a logical sequence, not just randomly. Now, if your child is working with an English tutor, this is worth noting with them. It's all fantastic for your child to get support with their spellings and potentially even their spellings homework. But use that hour that your child has working with someone one-on-one to support them in a structured approach to learn these spellings. Yes, it might feel like you're going away from what they're doing in the classroom because you're not following the 20 words on that read, cover, write list. But I guarantee a couple of sessions on very specific root words, prefixes, and suffixes, it's going to show up in the progress that you're not seeing right now. If you're working on this with your child one-on-one and you don't have that extra support, then the BDA, the British Dyslexia Association, have resources on their website that map out the sequence that we're talking about, the morphology sequence. They have it on their website so you can follow it clearly and in a logical order. To make it a little bit easier, I've linked them down in the show notes. And if you want something that your child can work on independently, then I highly recommend Nessie. Nessie is the program that we give to all of our families that are looking for a structured, multisensory, morphologically clear pathway. It blends together all of the things that we talked about today, and it supports your child in independently going through that program. Now, as we've mentioned that dyslexia often links to processing and processing speed, it's not unlikely that if your child has ADHD, they also will struggle with their spellings. So you've likely experienced some of the difficulties in sitting down and writing out the spellings 10 times over. Here's what actually works when the chair is the enemy to spelling success. My first favorite way to support a busybody and learning their spellings is the walking spelling approach. It is exactly what it says. You say the word, walk, each step is a new letter, and then you finish by saying the word again out loud. This bilateral movement, walking left and right, activates both sides of the brain's hemisphere. And we talked about that in episode 17. How movement supports memory, not as like a treat or a benefit, but an actuality and mechanism. If you've been around for a little while, then you will also know that one of my favorites is rhythm and rap. Now, I shared how I was able to remember deoxyribonucleic acid as a word and as spelling for DNA when I was in year 8, and we were preparing for an exam. 3 girls came dancing down the hallway, singing deoxyribonucleic acid, acid, deoxyribonucleic acid, acid. I can't hear that word now without dancing to the beat. Not only did it help me remember the word and all of the different parts, but also because I know what D and oxy and ribo and then nucleic, because I knew what each of those words meant, putting it together meant perfect spelling. And the same can work for your child. Rhythm and beat help make things sticky. So you can tap the letters, dance it out, sing it out, whatever is going to make it feel memorable. Another method is SOS while moving. We've talked about simultaneous oral spellings, which means doing something while you say the letters out loud. Why not do it with movement? The best part about this is it doesn't need a physical space. You can do it while you're walking through the grocery store and you see different words that you want your child to practice. Aisle, carton, associate. These are all words that you would see within that trip. Or if you have a very sporty child, why not ask them to do it every time they bounce the ball? Nation, nation. The whole beauty of this is that it doesn't need a desk. It needs memorable action and repetition. So the best way that we can see this working for your child is if we do it consistently. So take it on the go with you. Another one of my absolute favorite ways to remember something or encode something into long-term memory is through a voice note or a video. We call this blurting. So we go through the same process that we normally would. We say it out loud. We look for the hook inside that word. We identify it. We say our letters out loud. And then we finish by saying the word again. Then you have a whole video experience that shows your child how they've learned those words. So it becomes something the whole family can be part of. K-knife, Sarah Lynn. It's a K-knife. Plus, because they're in that teacher role, the control, the power dynamic shifts a little bit. There's more intrinsic motivation and engagement. And this is really helpful in building confidence and resilience for students who feel like they're actually maxed out when it comes to spellings and like they have no ability to learn. They do. We just need to shift the energy. Scripts for parents. How do we help without the arguments? Speaking of shifting the energy, one of the things I hear parents talk about the most is how when they actually try to help, their child refuses it and the battle begins. I understand. It's so difficult to sit there and know how to support someone and know that your method will make everything so much easier for them, especially when that clock is ticking. But you have to restrain yourself sometimes and let them go through that process of struggling. But after they go through that little bit of struggle and you are available to help them, here are a couple things that we can try. Instead of looking over their shoulder and saying, ooh, no, try again, that's wrong. Try this instead. Close, you're so close. Do you want me to show you something that I know as a little trick? Here, you're not correcting. There's no power dynamic. You're saying, I struggled too. I needed a trick. Shall I share it with you? That's collaboration. Instead of, but you know this one. Try again. Try instead, you know what helps me is if I say it out loud. Say it out loud for us. What sounds do you hear? We're back to the process, not the outcome. Instead of, but we've done this like 50 times. You should know this word by now. Try instead. This is a tricky one. Let's try it a different way. Do you think you can try and spell it while you're walking? Here we can change the method. We shift the energy when we shift the movement, and that brings us back to the task. And at the end of the day, if the session is going badly, stop. Even 10 minutes of high anxiety spelling is worth 0% of energy. It's not worth it. Your calm is the most powerful learning tool in that room. A regulated parent creates the conditions for a child who can regulate themselves as well. And I know I've said that so many times, and I'm going to keep saying it because it's true. Social regulation is a thing. If you're starting to feel and take on their frustration, their shame, their anger, their upset because of the spelling homework, we've just created an even bigger hurdle because now we're associating spellings with shame, a fixed mindset, frustration, anger, and it's impeded the family unit. That is going to be an even bigger hurdle to cover. So before we get there, we pause. We regulate ourselves. There's another video you can go to that talks about how we can regulate together. And then if we're feeling happy and calm, we can go back to it using a different technique. That brings us to our toolbox challenge for the week. I'd love for you to pick 3 words that your child is finding difficult to spell this week. Just 3. And if they're old enough, get them to help you choose those words. For each one of those words, we're going to trial a couple of things. We're going to say it out loud in the method that we see it written. Wednesday. Number 2, we're going to write it. And as we're writing it, we're going to say each of the letters out loud. Wednesday. After it's written nice and clear, you're going to look for the hook. What little word do we have in there that's going to help us remember that we put the N after the D? And number 3, you're going to come back to it before bed to see what stuck and tomorrow morning to see what we still have to work with. That's it. We're not doing a whole spelling list here. We're zooming in on 3 words and finding out which of the methods that we talked about today suits your child the best. Now, for all of you eager beavers out there who may want to go a step further, then head over to the British Dyslexia Association website. They have so many free resources on there, and they map out the clearly structured process that you should use to teach your child the prefixes, suffixes, and root words in a logical and clear manner. It is genuinely a worthwhile first stop. Nessie, as mentioned, is a fully structured, independent online guide that we highly recommend and use with many of our students. It's built on multisensory learning, phonics, and morphology. So if your child is looking for something that they can work on independently in between their sessions, then that is the one that I highly recommend. Now, before I let you go, I want to say something that I'm sure you already know, but sometimes it's good to hear. If your child has been struggling with spellings for years, it's not because they're not clever enough. It's because their brain needs different tools and structures, and the school system is relying on repetition alone, and that doesn't work for our multisensory loving brain. Sally Shaywitz, and I keep coming back to her because her work tells us so clearly with the brain imaging that dyslexia is not about intelligence. It never was. It's a specific difference in how the brain processes language. And once we have the right tools, it is absolutely something that we can work with. You, my friend, are here. And whether it's Thursday and you're sitting with your child and your coffee's gone cold like mine, and you're scrambling for a tool that's going to support them feel confident with their spellings when they go back to school, that you just did something incredible. Listening to this episode not only gave you the why their brain is struggling with this phonological pathway, but it's allowing you to feel less frustrated and stressed because you have tools that are going to make the biggest difference in their life. And now that we have the right tools, gone is the shame, gone is the fixed mindset, gone is the frustration for the whole family. We can make not only their spellings better, but their self-confidence soar, knowing that this is not something that they'll just never get. This is something that they just need the right tools for. That builds resilience, and it's all down to you listening in today. If you think this episode can support another family in their dyslexic journey, make sure you pass it on. And don't forget to pull out your calendar, set a reminder 2 Thursdays from now at 7 a.m. to join me either on YouTube or wherever you're listening to your podcast. We're going to deep dive into more ways that we can support your child at the intersection of mental health and academics. I'm Sarah Lynn from the Mindful Toolbox, and I cannot wait to see you in 2 weeks' time. Take care, and we're done. This episode is for you. And we pause for Jonah to eat. I still want my coffee though. Don't judge. Now, many times spellings will go home and a child will sit down and without really thinking about it, they'll just write Wednesday, necessary, blue jays. Oh my goodness, Sarah Lynn, where's your brain?